So welcome to the, the ABCs of IEPs. And the reason why I named it that is because it's really a basic overview to give you some general information about what an IEP is, what a 504 is, what are the differences between the two. Sometimes they get confusing. There are some similarities and then a lot of differences. So I want to take you through that so that you have a better knowledge when going forward. You know, your child might not need one. We'll talk about that too. You know, and also if they do, how do you start? Where do you go about getting one? Who do you call? What are questions that you ask? So I'll take you through all of that, okay? I'm not an expert on education law. Don't consider this legal advice. This is just, you know, that's my husband, Greg, by the way. He'll chime in from time to time. But this is, you know, my knowledge as a teacher and an administrator, and most importantly, as parents, because we've gone through this process over the last few years. Jackson's about to start kindergarten in September, so we still have a long road ahead of us. You know, we did try to get him services early on. We were denied, so we went through that. And then last year, we were able to get him services through an IEP, and we were successful. So I have both stories to share with you, okay? So basically, hopefully you leave today understanding what an IFSP is. That's an Individualized Family Service Plan, and that's went from birth to age 3. We don't talk about IEPs until they turn 3 years old, although it is very similar. An IEP, an Individualized Education Program, and program and plan are interchangeable. I'll see them used, you know, from time to time. They'll switch the words. Don't worry about that. Also, what a 504 plan is. What's the difference between an accommodation and a modification? And there are major differences between the two. And hopefully you'll leave with some helpful advice based on our experience. Okay? So as Tony said, you know, that's my bio. But what I find interesting is, you know, just about 20 years in the New York State public school system. I have a master's in special education where I studied many disabilities. I work in a school at the moment with a large special education population with some very severely disabled students. And I had never, ever, ever heard the word nystagmus until our son was born. So even with all that, didn't have a clue, not a clue, until he was diagnosed. So like I said, we're going to share our journey a little bit, and hopefully that'll help guide you down the right path. So speaking of, I'm sure, like I said, you've seen him running around like a loon. But so Jackson, a little background on Jackson. He's about to start kindergarten, but you know, he was born, everything was fine, about 2 weeks early, nothing major. You know, we noticed early on that he was very sensitive to the light. When we'd take him out in the car carrier, I'd put him on the porch to lock the door, and he'd immediately, even if the light wasn't directly on his face, he'd close his eyes and turn his head. And his eyes, you know, obviously we saw them oscillating and moving, but newborn babies' eyes do weird things anyway, so I guess we were blissfully naive that it would just stop, and I wasn't really paying much attention to it. So I guess around 4 months old, the pediatrician had said, you know, I don't like what's going on with his eyes. I want you to go to a pediatric ophthalmologist and go from there. So that's what we did. So we had the appointment, and he was immediately diagnosed with nystagmus, first time I had ever heard the word. And then they send you for the dreaded MRI to make sure it's not a brain tumor, where every parent's, you know, heart skips a beat. My mother's crying, you know, a whole big mess. But you rush him in. Fortunately, we were very lucky. That wasn't it. We then went back to the doctor. He sent us to a retinal specialist out of Mount Sinai in Manhattan, who I won't say his name because we weren't a big fan of his. But he did some more tests, the ERG, the VEP, all those tests on Jackson. And again, we were very lucky because things were coming back positive. He didn't have issues with his optic nerve. He didn't have issues you know, with his fovea. But at that doctor's appointment, I keep looking at Greg because I think it was a turning point for the two of us. He proceeded to tell us everything at 7 months old that our son will never do. He'll never ride a bicycle. He'll never drive a car. He'll never play ball sports. He'll never do this, 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 and this. And we were just like someone, you know, took our puppy. We were totally deflated when we left that appointment. But I think it was a turning point for us because even though we left very depressed about, you know, the future of our son and what possibly could happen, we went home and really started researching, which was a turning point for us, I think so. And that's really where we found the American Nystagmus Network, which was huge for us. And that was in, I think it was November of 2010, and Ann was having their conference in DC that summer. So we immediately made sure we headed down to DC to find out all the information that we possibly could. We met Dr. Hurdle for the first time, which I don't know how many of you were able to hear him speak today. You know, we're big fans of his. He always just makes you feel hopeful and feel better about things. And even he takes the time to explain things to you. And we really appreciated that. After hearing everything that Jackson would never do, he really started telling us about all these wonderful things and all his patients that do drive and do all these great things. So we immediately left there and made an appointment to see Dr. Hurdle. Now, we live on Long Island, so obviously he's not our main doctor. We're not going back and forth to Ohio all the time, but we really found it worth the trip for us. We had a consultation. They did the eye movement recordings. He was too young to do all the tests. He wouldn't let them patch him, and if any of you have been through that before, he was trying to rip the wires that they were stuck to his head. We've since been back, and they've been successful with the test, but when he was that young, he wouldn't let them do it. So basically, again, we felt very hopeful. And ever since then, we've had what I call a nystagmus summer. We either go to the conference, or the following summer, we go to see Dr. Hurdle. We just kind of like to be on his radar. He says to check in maybe every 2 years. He repeats the testing. We get the eye movement recordings done again, and we've found that very beneficial. So as you can see, Jackson had pretty prominent null point. He would turn his head all the way to the right and look out the corner of his eyes. The top two pictures show that more. So when he was 2, we decided that we wanted to have the surgery for him. I know that's a personal decision. Some people prefer to not have surgery for their child. Of course, I understand that. But as you can see, his head is so much straighter based on that. And again, for us, I know Dr. Hurdle, he did not do the surgery. Our local pediatric ophthalmologist did, but we did request that our local doctor consult with Dr. Hurdle before doing the surgery, which he did, and he changed how he was going to do the surgery. He was convinced only 2 muscles on each eye needed to be cut and reattached, and Dr. Hurdle convinced him with the latest research that all 4 should be cut. So he changed, how he was doing the surgery, which was big. And we've since taken Jackson back to Dr. Hurdle again, and he was happy with the results of the surgery. For us, driving to Ohio and then, having surgery and being in a hotel room wasn't really how we wanted to do it, so we wanted to do it closer to home. But as you can see, although not perfect, from time to time you'll still see a slight head turn, but it's definitely much better. Although interestingly, they talked about the head shaking this morning, or the head bob, which we never noticed until after the surgery. His null point was corrected, and all of a sudden the head started going. And I remember turning to Greg and saying, uh-oh, did we mess him up more? Should we have not done it? But again, our doctor spoke to Dr. Hurdle again, who had said that he probably was just focusing so much on keeping on the null point and turning his head that it kept the head still. And now that he's more relaxed and can look straight ahead, because of the nerve muscles affecting the neck, when he's relaxed, his head will kind of bounce around a little bit. So we don't see it all the time, but from time to time it pops up. Okay. So now your child's diagnosed with nystagmus. Now what? Okay, maybe nothing. Just because your child is diagnosed with nystagmus does not mean that he or she qualifies for special education services. Okay? For us at the time, Jackson, when he was younger, was meeting his milestones. He crawled on time, he walked on time, and I thought, the 2 of us thought, you're always second guessing yourself. Should I be doing more? Should I be getting him services? Or is he okay? Is he okay as is, and he doesn't need anything? So we were always going back and forth with that. So for us at the time, we didn't pursue anything. If your child is not meeting their milestones as they're growing up, talk to your pediatrician. They may benefit from services either based on the doctor's medical diagnosis or on a special education evaluation. So I did promise Tony I would try to keep my Long Island accent out of the presentation. If it creeps up a little bit, I apologize. And I did promise my husband I'd try to keep my New York attitude out of the presentation. But this is the one slide where it comes through. So just because, any kind of service falls under the term special education. And a lot of people have issues with this. And I do understand that, but the New Yorker in me just says get over it, personally. I think I'm preaching to the choir. Obviously, all of you are looking for help for your children. That's why you're here, so I'm sure you'll do everything you can to get that. But we even have family members who would say, well, I want, a nephew of ours that had some speech issues. I want to get him help, but not special education. I don't want special ed. Okay, they have this preconceived notion of what that term means. A lot of people do that. I see it all the time in the school. And you really need to get that out of your head. I feel like people think of special ed in a very narrow way. And I like to think of it as this giant umbrella, okay, with a whole bunch of services underneath. And yes, for kids that are very severely impaired, it could range all the way from a residential placement all the way to having a 504 where really all you need to do is sit a little bit closer to the board and, have your notes enlarged or get some extra time on your tests and everything in between. So you really have to think of special education services as very broad. And basically it just means that the school has to do something special to help your child and to help educate him. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, like I said, yeah, exactly. Well, you get that too. That's what my tax dollars are for. So it's funny. There are people, I see it all the time. There are parents that want to get everything, and we'll say because they're taxed. I mean, every little thing that they can possibly get, and then other parents that as soon as they hear the term special ed, don't want it. So, there's quite a few differences out there. So basically, let's talk for a minute about an IFSP, which is an individualized family service plan. So if you are your doctor, feel that your child, now this is just from birth to age 3. IEPs don't come into play until age 3. So from birth to age 3, if you think your child could benefit from services, he or she isn't, meeting their milestones, you're going to talk to your pediatrician. He or she will give you a list of different agencies in your county that you can call, and you'll request an evaluation. And from birth to age 3, this is handled in every state that I know of, but I'm not an expert on every state, so check with your own. But every state that I'm aware of, this falls under the county's Department of Health Services. That's who pays for it. So basically, you might not have heard of an IFSP, but you might have heard of EI, which is early intervention. Okay? So if your young child, again, you have some concerns about him, and you would like to get a referral for early intervention services, you make that phone call. You get the list of agencies from your pediatrician. You call up. They will send an initial service coordinator to your home. That's kind of like the go-to person, the administrator that you'll talk to with questions, and he or she will, get all the therapists and handle the meetings. So basically, they come to your house, they hear all your concerns, and you'll have a multidisciplinary evaluation. And what that means is you'll have more than one evaluation in different areas by different people. And you really can pick. You'll say what your concerns are. My child isn't walking, you might want a PT, a physical therapist evaluation. My child isn't speaking, and I believe they should be speaking by now. You'll have a speech therapist. Again, vision therapist. So you'll pick. You'll say your concerns, and they'll help you with that. They have 45 days from the time that you contact them to complete this. Oh, you know what? Before we go on, actually, I want to tell you a little bit about Jackson at this point. So, again, we didn't have major concerns. He wasn't really missing any milestones at that point in time, but we have a pediatrician that always wants to see what you can get. Call up, see if you'll get something. Maybe he'll get vision therapy. I don't know, but try. Call. Here's a list of agencies. And we were kind of on the fence about it. He was about 18 months old, and I was kind of I was thinking he should have been speaking a little more by then, which actually, if you heard him now, he doesn't stop from the second he wakes up until the moment he goes to bed. But at the time, I thought, well, maybe he should be speaking a little more. Maybe we could go that route, and and of course the vision, but also the speech. So we called up. They sent somebody to the house. They had people come, a vision therapist one day, a speech therapist the other day. He really fell within normal limits at that point in time, which is very easy to do. They don't ask for a lot. But it was interesting because the vision therapist, always with Jackson, because he is very verbal, and he compensates a lot, and he'll really kind of fake you out that he's doing better than he actually is because he talks a lot. But the vision therapist would say, obviously he had trouble tracking. She knew his eyes were all over the place. Didn't stop him from doing anything that an 18-month-old was doing at the moment, though. So she just noted in it that she had concerns, but at this point in time, he doesn't qualify for anything. Okay. So for us, we were dead in the water at that point in time. We were denied. We didn't end up even having a meeting. He just didn't qualify for anything. Okay. However, if your child does qualify, you'll have a meeting, and also the services that are provided, they put it in quotes, must be provided in a natural environment. So that's either in your house or, if your child's in daycare, they'll send the therapist to the daycare. But an environment that's natural for your child is where the services must be provided. Okay. And these are just a list of a few that could be provided for your child. Vision therapy, OT, PT, speech. So the IFSP should be reviewed every 6 months because the children are developing so quickly then. But again, it doesn't have to be a formal meeting. It could be a phone conference. It could be through the mail. However, there must be an official meeting every year to review the goals and to proceed with the next year. So now your child turns 3. This is the gray area, 3 to 5. Okay, and it becomes the Committee on Preschool Special Education. So I call it the gray area because now you contact your school district. You don't contact, the pediatrician doesn't give you a list of agencies anymore. As of age 3, you call up your local school district and you say that you have concerns about your child. Okay? However, it still gets paid for through the Department of Health. So those 2 years are a little wishy-washy. So basically, if your child already was receiving services, had an IFSP, a couple months before your child's 3rd birthday, that service coordinator that was in charge of you will contact your school district for you and will begin the transition to move everything over into an IEP. Okay? As soon as the child turns 3, it becomes an IEP. And if your child never received an IFSP, however, in the 3 to 5 years you have concerns, that's when you'll call up your local school district and request an evaluation. So basically, what's the difference between an IEP and a 504? And I'm going to take you through this on many slides. I kind of repeat it to help it soak in a little bit. But basically, they're both legal documents. And I hear all the time that, the IEP is more important than the 504, and you should really try to get that. And it's not necessarily true. They're both legally binding documents. Basically, they fall under 2 different laws. Okay, the IEP falls under the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And once you turn from 3 and 4, you can just be classified as a preschooler with a disability. But once you turn 5, you must fall under the criteria of these 13 specific disabilities. That's a federal law. The disability must impact the child's educational performance, okay, so that the student needs specialized instruction. And I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. Also, the schools receive federal funding when they give an IEP. A 504 is a civil rights law. Okay, it falls under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disability Act. Basically, it's a much broader term, and you don't have to fall under this specific criteria. You just have to show that a child has a disability that substantially limits one major life activity. That life activity could be walking, it could be vision, it could be reading, it could be anything like that. Again, much broader eligibility, and the schools don't receive additional funding for that. So I know in my district, they'd prefer it. I mean, if the criteria is there, they'd rather have an IEP because they'll get some funding for that than a 504. So what do they have in common? Okay, they both provide accommodations and modifications in the school environment. They can provide related services. I'll talk about this a little more, but it's less common with a 504, and I'll get into that in a minute. But each document is unique, it's specific to the child, and it's updated yearly. So everybody's IEP in 504 is vastly different. Okay, so time for school. Your child's, 5. I know we were always kind of thinking, do we wait until Jackson gets into school and see if he has some issues, or do we try to put this document in place beforehand? It's like we don't want him to falter. We want to have everything there that he possibly can. At the same time, if he doesn't need something, we don't want to necessarily provide him with something he doesn't need because he needs to learn how to compensate and function in the real world as well. So we always kind of struggled with that. But again, if you are, it's time for school, kindergarten starting, and you are interested in getting an IEP or a 504 in place, you're going to call up your local school district. It's probably the title might be different, Director of Special Education, Director of Pupil Services. You're going to request an evaluation. You are going to bring some information regarding your child's impairment. You request a functional visual assessment by the teacher of the visually impaired. We don't have a teacher of the visually impaired on staff, although we do have children with vision issues, so we contract them out from an agency. So not every district will have that person on staff, but they will get them if you need to do an evaluation. And again, you'll bring medical documentation from your ophthalmologist. So we were going to wait until Jackson was starting kindergarten. And actually, on a side note, if you have time, it takes 60 days to do the evaluation. So if you wanted something in place, personally, I would kind of do it 2 months this school year before, why they still have about 2 months left in the school year, so it's set. You can do it over the summer as well, but I always feel like the skeleton crew is in over the summer, and a lot of people are taking vacation, and you're not getting your calls returned, and I like to do as little over the summer as possible, personally. So we were going to do this with Jackson. However, last year when he was 4, there was almost a big difference from him, right? From the fall we went to the winter. It was almost like he hibernated. I don't know what happened. He came out in spring, and he just seemed like weaker to us. He started, he hadn't been playing in the playgrounds all winter, and he just had like a weaker torso. He had a hard time pulling himself up. I noticed, I guess now because he was in pre-K too, and they were, working on writing your name and doing things like that. So we noticed that he still didn't have a dominant hand. He still actually doesn't have a dominant hand. If I put the fork on the left side of the plate, he feeds himself with his left hand. If I put the fork on the right side of his plate, he feeds himself with his right hand. Still does this to this day. That hasn't been worked out just yet. I noticed he had a weak grip on the pencil, and he always hated to color, which I just chalked up to being a boy. That wasn't his thing. However, they were forcing him to do that more in school, and we started noticing that he would, interestingly enough, color the left side of the paper with his left hand. And when he got to the middle, he would switch crayons, and he'd color the right side of the paper with his right hand. And I kept thinking, that's weird. So I would say to Greg, have you noticed that? And so, of course, working in a school, I know I have a little bit of an advantage. I would go in, I spoke to the OT, and I spoke to the, the school psychologist, and they would say, play patty cake with him, which I hadn't done since he was an infant. And I tried that, and he really had a hard time hitting my hand going across. It was very strange to me. And they gave us the term crossing the midline, which became my catchphrase and made me sound smart when I called up about an evaluation. That for some reason, he liked to do everything on the left side of his body with his left hand and the right side of his body with his right hand, which was very strange. I didn't know if this had something to do with the nystagmus or if it didn't. All this is new to us. So our local pediatric ophthalmologist, quickly blew us off and said it has absolutely nothing to do with nystagmus. He just has an OT issue. We then went to see Dr. Hurdle that summer, who pretty much said the same thing, but if you've ever met with Dr. Hurdle, he just has a much nicer way of saying things to you, and he makes you not think you're crazy, and he understands you. So he basically said the same thing, but he said, you know what, I don't think it's caused by the nystagmus, but nystagmus is a neurological issue. He said, and it never surprises me when these kids have another neurological issue, whether it be OT, PT, social development, sometimes you'll see things later in life coming up with the kids in other areas. So again, he said the exact same thing as the other doctor, but he made us feel much better about it and that we weren't so crazy. So we had these concerns, called up the school district. I requested an evaluation, OT and vision, okay, and they sent the therapist to his preschool, which I didn't really like because I couldn't sit in and snoop on the evaluations like I could when he was younger, and they did it at home. However, all the therapists did call me before and after they evaluated him, and they also sent a psychologist to him. Okay. So basically, okay, after the evaluation, they're going to come, they're going to evaluate your child. You're going to have a meeting, okay? You're going to have a meeting to decide if your child needs an IEP or needs a 504. You're going to meet with the school's IEP team. We'll talk about who that is in a minute. But before the meeting, you should receive all the reports, all the evaluations prior to the meeting. Do not go to that meeting unless you have those in your hand. Nothing should be a surprise at the meeting. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to give it to you way in advance. I was calling and harassing them. I think our meeting was on a Wednesday, and I think they were emailed to me Monday. So I really only had one day to review them, and that is legal, because the therapists, for whatever reason, were late in getting them in. But they got them to us on time. So, again, I have a little bit of an advantage. I had one day then to have my school psychologist rip it apart, tell me what I should focus on and questions I should ask. And although he did well in some areas, there were some sub-tests where he was quite a bit lower. And I didn't know what those sub-tests were, but the psychologist would say to me, well, that test is timed. If he had to pick out shapes or whatever it was, he only had a minute to do it, whereas the other test was not timed. So obviously with his nystagmus, that's going to slow him down. So that was information that I needed to know. However, you might not have that, but write your questions down. If you see some areas where your child scored a lot lower, ask if it was a timed test. Ask what they had to do. There's a whole slew of subtests that you don't necessarily know everything. I didn't know everything, okay? So basically, you'll have all the reports ahead of time, and you're going to go to a meeting. The IEP team, okay, that's you. You're part of the team, okay? You're not in addition to. You are a main part of the team. the CSE chairperson, which could be the director of special education, could be the assistant director, it could be a psychologist that was, titled the CSE chairperson. There'll be a general education teacher, and there'll be a special education teacher. The child, when appropriate, but that usually starts in high school that they have them sitting in, I think around age 14. And there may be additional members. There could be a psychologist there. You can bring an advocate. You can bring anybody you want, okay? If your sister-in-law is a teacher somewhere and she has more information about this, or she knows, or your neighbor down the block went through this, bring them, okay? You're entitled to bring whoever you want to ask any questions that you want, and I suggest that you do. And at the meeting, obviously, they'll review the reports. It's your time to ask any questions. Now, we talked about the 13 classifications. So once your child turns 5 years old, in order to get an IEP, they have to fall under one of these 13 classifications. Okay, I won't read through all of them, but autism, blindness, other health impairments is a good one. Sometimes they can fit a lot of stuff in there because it's a little general. So sometimes ADHD falls under that, or multiple disabilities, and I highlighted, obviously, visual impairment. That's what Jackson ultimately ended up getting classified as. And if anyone, I know we'll take questions at the end, but if something pops into your head as I'm going through this, please ask. So again, just having nystagmus doesn't entitle you to services. To receive an IEP, okay, there must be evidence that the nystagmus impacts your child's education. And that's the definition from the Department of Education for visual impairment, which again is a little vague. Usually things are, but visual impairment, including blindness, means an impairment in vision that even with correction adversely affects a child's educational performance. I know a lot of times people think, well, Jackson has glasses, so he's fine. Glasses fixed him. Okay, not the case. They really don't have a lot of knowledge about nystagmus at all. So you'll find that coming up. But again, even with the correction, it impacts their performance. Basically, to receive a 504, though, it's much broader. You don't need to fall into any of those 13 disabilities. You just really need a doctor's report stating that your child has a disability that impacts, again, their vision or their mobility or whatever the issue is. And the doctor can write a list of accommodations that would help your child in class. So it's actually much easier to get. Okay. So again, to qualify for an IEP, you have to show that your disability requires specialized, direct instruction. And I like to think of it as it usually comes with a person. Okay? Your child needs speech services, which will come with a speech therapist. Your child needs vision therapy, which will come with a vision therapist. It's coming with another body to provide a lot of those accommodations. Okay? A 504, basically, your child has a disability and it requires accommodations that for the most part can be made in the general education setting. The teacher can have the child sit closer to the board. She could give him extended time, he or she. You can enlarge the text. You don't necessarily need another person, another therapist coming in and doing something for them. And although it is possible, like I have heard of 504s where you do have services on there, but I was speaking to my director of special ed the other day, and I said, why would you have a 504 with a speech therapist on it? And she said, exactly, we wouldn't, because we're not getting any funding for it if we do that, to pay for the other person. So, I like to think of a true 504 as really leveling the playing field and making accommodations within the classroom to help the child. An IEP is really more specialized instruction where you need another person coming in and providing some of the therapies. And I see all the time on the Ann Facebook page and on the listserv and the website, don't get the 504, don't get the 504, you have to go for the IEP. I don't always understand people's thinking with that, because in my opinion, either you fall under one of those 13 classifications or you don't. I'm not saying don't push for as much as you could get. We did that as well. However, if your child is functioning fine, is cognitively fine, speech is fine, and really all they need is the print enlarged for them, that's not an IEP. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's all that they need. And again, they're both legally binding documents. So if for some reason either one of them weren't being followed, you can easily sue the school district and they wouldn't have a leg to stand on that. So,
Not that we advocate.
What? Not that we advocate that? No. No.
Ever switch down to 504?
It could, yeah. In fact, I don't know for sure. We'll see what happens with Jackson, but probably eventually he may just need a 504. Once, if his OT, if his fine motor gets strengthened, and we'll talk about his IEP in a minute. But yes, you could, every year you have a meeting to either continue the services, or it could be switched to a 504 if all your child needs now are just some accommodations in the classroom. It could be switched to that.
So if the vision is continually changing and getting worse, and they're having to get stronger glasses or whatever, then that would be enough to keep them on the IEP?
I would push it so that it did, yeah. I would get documentation from the doctor, but again, if all they need is to sit closer to the board, maybe not. Just because their glasses are getting stronger doesn't necessarily mean that they would need more. So it really depends on the situation. So what does an IEP look like? Basically, it's a written plan for children ages 3 to 21. And 21 doesn't mean after graduation. 21 means for those kids that are still in high school at 21, which could be because they're very severely impaired and they can stay in a specialized program until they're 21, or they're just having difficulty earning the requirements for graduation, so they're kind of staying to take some extra classes, so up until 21, but that's through high school. And it contains a list of components. Well, I know this is a large list, and we'll go through it. But basically, there are present levels of performance. It'll list the evaluations. It'll list any concerns you had. They'll write some goals for your child and then report how they're going to report those goals back to you. The next few kind of get grouped together. Recommended special education programs, related services, which means speech, OT, PT, supplementary aids and services, any assistive technology. Support for the school personnel, which they did include in Jackson. Jackson is, I'm going to show you his in a minute. It's a very simple IEP. It's not very detailed at the moment, but I did like that they included support for the school personnel. They have a consult 4 times a year for the classroom teacher. It really has nothing to do with Jackson, but the classroom teacher is provided with time to meet with the teacher visually impaired, so that she can ask questions or, learn some techniques. Again, some testing accommodations, service delivery. The child's going to receive speech therapy 3 times a week in a group of 3 to 1. It's just a little more specific about what's the service being provided. An extent of non-participation. That just means if at any time your child is being removed from the regular education, let's say they're in a wheelchair and they can't take regular phys ed, they have to take adaptive phys ed, that might be one period where they're removed from their non-disabled peers, and that has to be noted on the IEP. So again, it's just a list, it's just a random list that I came up with, but different things: vision services, orientation and mobility services, and they can be different. I have a student in my school now who is blind and severely autistic, and he has people that come for different reasons. He has the vision teacher that comes and works with him every day, and then he also has a woman that comes a couple times a week to do orientation and mobility and really walks him around the schoolyard and takes him up and down the stairs and gets him more accustomed to the environment. Physical therapy, maybe a one-to-one aide or a classroom aide. Extended time, preferential seating, separate location, magnifiers, large print, copies of notes if it's too much, especially going into high school for them to take all the notes down, that can be provided for them. No Scantrons, the bubble sheets of the taking a multiple choice test and state tests. Sometimes it blends, it's too much for them to see. So it could be that they sit with someone and tell them the answer, and the adult will bubble in the Scantron sheet for them, but they don't have to do that. A slant board to help with writing, and even some changes to the environment, maybe stairways marked with, the yellow tape at the end so that they understand when the step is coming. So all those can be added to the IEP. Okay. This is, I know this is very difficult to see, and in the handout, it's ridiculously small. I apologize. I was already teased by some friends this morning that I make a nystagmus handout with font that nobody can read. so I do apologize for that. But I wanted to take you through just very quickly. I know it's even up here it's difficult to read, but some pages from Jackson's IEP, just so you can see what it looks like. It's like a little packet that they give you. The first page just basically gives all our basic information and says when he was tested and who was at the meeting, and they classified him as visually impaired, which I have to say we were shocked. We really didn't I didn't have to prove a lot for that for some reason, and our district was very willing to give services, so we lucked out. The district I work in is not so willing to give services, so that's why I thought it was going to be more of a fight than it actually was. This is his, present levels of performance, talks about his test results, different areas that I was concerned with or not concerned with. It says that Mrs. Rossi doesn't have any concerns with his cognitive development, but I do have concerns with his motor skills. He's visually impaired. He wears corrective glasses. He sees 20/60 with the lenses and 20/80 without. So they list all these things that most of it they received from you through the information. Okay, this is some of his goals. They list the goals, the criteria, how you're going to be told about it if he or she is meeting their goals. So what's one example? Jackson will hold the pencil in a mature tripod grasp for 30 or more seconds. He's supposed to have that 75% success over 4 weeks. They're going to record the observations, and they're going to let us know twice a year at the end of the marking period. So those are just some examples of his goals. He'll trace his first and last name for 6 repetitions. Some of them are very simple. I'm sorry, there was one with the vision that I was thinking, how are they going to get him to do that? But that's okay with the nystagmus. He'll move his eyes and head to localize and focus on an object when presented in different directions for 20 seconds. Good luck getting that one with him, but we'll see. they can keep working on that one. So, and again, this is all the recommended programs. This is one of the last pages, and it's if you see up top, it says special education program, and it says none, because Jackson is he'll be in a regular kindergarten class, so he's not in a separate special ed program. However, he does have related services. He has vision services, which will be individual, 2 times in a 6-day cycle for 40 minutes in the therapist room. He is going to receive OT in a small group of 5 to 1, 2 times in a 6-day cycle for 30 minutes. Other supplemental aids and services are going to give him a slant board for writing. He has a very difficult time writing, pushes very hard, every pencil. All I do is sharpen pencils. As soon as he starts, it just breaks. So the slant board we found helps. And really, you can do a slant board at home with just a fat binder that's empty, and it tilts down, and you can tape the paper to it. But if they want to provide him with a slant board, that's fine. So that's what they'll do. They also talked about contrast. I don't think they've ever encountered a student with nystagmus before, so we'll kind of be navigating this together as we go next year. Talks about enlarging the text whenever possible, additional time to complete assignments. It did talk about possibly providing him going forward with an iPad, but for kindergarten, I don't think that's necessary, so we'll see. We'll keep that one in our back pocket and use it when we need to. Okay, so what does a 504 look like? 504 looks very similar to an IEP, except it's much shorter. It doesn't have as many components. Okay, it's for children that don't qualify for the IEP. It's much easier to get, and it's a much shorter document. But again, it's a written plan. We talked about this before. Basically, it just levels the playing field. So it's different accommodations that you can do within the classroom or within the school so that the child can participate freely with their non-disabled peers. Okay, so again, you'll bring the medical documentation this time. They will still evaluate your child, but they might not, find much necessarily. And then they'll have a meeting with the same team. They call it the IEP team, the 504 team. It's usually the same people that are there, and determine if a 504 plan is needed. I asked my director of special ed this week, do you ever sit down and the parent has documentation from the doctor and you deny the 504? And she said, no way. She said, that's not for me to do. If a doctor's saying the child is disabled, I'm not even going there. They're disabled, and we're going to provide them with a 504 plan. So that was good to hear, at least, because I think, at least that's a legal document that you can get in place, at the very least. Okay, so again, it doesn't have all the goals and all that added. It just really has a list of the accommodations and the testing accommodations. They don't have to update you multiple times a year like they do on the IEP, though. Because there aren't goals, they don't have to say, after the first marking period, he or she reached their goals or they didn't. Here it's just the accommodations in place, so you'll have a meeting at the end of the year, but that'll really be it. So again, some accommodations just for visually impaired students. seated near instruction, the materials enlarged, not forced to share materials, which I think a lot of teachers don't understand, especially with the null point, that sometimes they need to hold their book or their worksheet on their own. Oral administration of the tests. Maybe they have difficulty reading, but someone can read the test to them. They can give the answers orally, and the teacher can write it down. Maybe adjusting the lighting, different magnification devices, giving copies of notes or recording lectures as they get older and into high school. Okay, so let's talk a minute about FAPE, which stands for Free Appropriate Public Education, which is your legal right. Your child is legally, supposed to have a free, appropriate public education. But it says appropriate. It doesn't say the best education they could possibly have. So that's kind of a little loophole with the law, but which can be frustrating sometimes. But so basically, free, appropriate education, in my opinion, is average. They have to provide you with an average education. Might not be the best that you want. You might want the iPad for your child, but maybe there's some budgetary issues going on, and the district can't afford to get iPads for everybody who needs them. So they'll enlarge the text for the child in another way. Might not be the way you wanted it to be. It would be easier if you had the iPad where they could blow it up, but as long as they can meet that accommodation, it's appropriate. Doesn't mean it's how you want it or it's the best, but it's appropriate. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about accommodations versus modifications. And again, there is a big difference between the two. You'll see accommodations and modifications both, probably in an IEP, but just accommodations in a 504. So again, accommodations really level the playing field. The child can really do all the work, can do everything, but they just need some assistance. They might need magnifiers. They might need some extra time. They might need the books on tape because they have difficulty reading the print. They might need to sit closer, have the test read to them, but they're taking all the exact same work and materials, tests. They just might need extra time or a little more assistance. A modification is when you're really changing the curriculum. Maybe your child's in 5th grade, it's a 5th grade class, but they're reading on a 2nd grade level and they can't read some of the books that they're reading. That's a modification. Adapting the worksheets, changing the curriculum, shortening the assignments because they can't handle the work. That's a modification. That would come in more with an IEP where they're probably receiving some different therapies. Okay, again, accommodations just level the playing field for everyone. Okay, so you're right as a parent. If you don't like how the meeting's going or you want, something added to the IEP, please speak up at the meeting. Okay? Most districts don't want to have a problem with you. I'm not saying there aren't difficult people out there. We all know that they are. But for the most part, they want to smooth everything over. And sometimes they'll, if you're pushing something, they'll give in and they'll add it in. So I'm not saying don't push, but speak up, okay? If you leave and you're not happy with how the meeting went, you think you should have gotten some other services or you were denied something, call the next person up. That's where I would start. If a psychologist ran the meeting, call the director of special education. If the director of special education ran the meeting, call the superintendent. Call the Board of Education. Okay, they don't want a problem, so they're going to try to work it out and to smooth everything over. Okay. If you're not happy then, you can always contact the state ed department. There's usually a regional chapter in your county. They will then call the district for you, try to kind of work out whatever the problem is. You can be provided with an impartial mediator, which will sit with you and the district. They don't tell you what to do or tell the district what to do, but they try to work out a plan or a compromise that everyone could be happy. If that's not the case, though, you can always go to due process. You can lawyer up if you want and sue the district. That's obviously a little more costly, though, especially if it doesn't go your way. Okay, so after graduation, I talked about how IEPs go to age 21, but it doesn't mean college. Okay, an IEP does not follow the child to the college. However, a 504 can, because that's civil rights law that goes all the way through employment. The Individuals with Disability Education Act only goes up into high school. So once your child gets into college, if there are some accommodations that he or she needs, I would take the latest document, whether that be an IEP or a 504, and any updated testing that you have, and you contact most of them are called the Office of Disability Services, but you have to check with your school if it's called something else. And you sit down with them, you kind of show them the information, the accommodations that the child's needed, and they're usually pretty good with working with you and making some adjustments. Again, though, you're not going to have many modifications. They're not changing the curriculum in college. If your child got into the school, they're expected to do all the work. They might move the classroom if your child's physically disabled and can't get up the steps. They'll move that class downstairs. That's, they're required to do that under civil rights law. They may help, enlarging the text or allowing the child to sit in a certain place, but they're not going to cut the assignments in half. So that's really why the 504 will follow and not the IEP. Okay, some advice from our journey. Okay, be assertive but not aggressive, which sometimes is hard to do. You don't want to be, that guy. And we all have them, no matter where you work. I'm sure there's someone that, calls up and you're like, oh, tell her I'm in a meeting. I can't talk to her right now. Okay, you don't want to be that person. You want to keep the school district on their toes, definitely. But you want them to want to help you. You don't want to be the one that says, oh, I'll call her tomorrow. Make her wait. Okay. Arrive to the CSE prepared and look professional. I joke with Greg and I expected a battle. We expected a battle going in for Jackson's IEP meeting. I don't know why. I just assumed because where I work, it's often a battle, so I thought it would be as well. So I said, we need to look professional. I remember Greg took the day off. He was putting jeans on. I said, go get your suit on. He said, suit, I took the day off. I said, put suit up. That's exactly what we said, suit up. He had his briefcase. We looked ridiculous. We looked like we were giving a deposition to Congress, the two of us, right? Like we were ready. So we went in, we had our notes on our legal pad, which we took out immediately, in both in our Navy suits. And I took everything that I ever encountered, a piece of paper on nystagmus. Some of it probably wasn't even relevant, but they didn't know that. And I put it all in a binder. They didn't know what was in the binder. And I even said to my special ed director, I said, I'm going to put everything in a binder. What do you think about that? She said, ooh, binders intimidate people. She said, I often sit at meetings and think, what's in that? she said, that's a good idea. Fake them out, okay? So you kind of play the game a little bit. We looked professional. We had our notes and our questions written down. They had no idea what was in my fake binder that did have information from the doctor if I had to pull it out. But for the most part, I didn't know how much it would help me, but it looked important. Remember, you can request minutes from the meeting. This was a little tip that the director of our CPSE meeting gave us. And she said, if you don't like how it's going, for us, everything went the way we wanted it to, so I didn't request the minutes because we had the IEP exactly the way I wanted. But she said, keep in mind that at the end of the meeting, you can say, I'd like a copy of the minutes. She said, only lawyer parents do that. She said, and it seems to intimidate everybody because then everything that was said is on the record and you have a copy of it. So always know that if something's not going your way, or if they mention, we're not going to do this now, but maybe down the road your child will need X, Y, and Z, request a copy of those minutes where it's written in there. You can, sure, you can. Like I said, we didn't this time because everything we asked for was in there, but yes, you definitely are entitled to, and I didn't even know that you could do that. I guess I never thought about it, so that was a good tip. Keep an open dialogue with the school. I know that sounds, common sense. However, if something's bothering you with the classroom teacher, or, I don't know, maybe a test came home and you don't think the accommodation was given that should have been given, don't wait until conferences. Don't wait until 3 months later to bring it up with the teacher. Send in a note, call her or him up, and let them know that you're concerned. Okay, it's better to kind of nip it in the bud right away than to let it keep going. I always say befriend the secretary. That's just, I know in every office, the secretary will make or break the office. So personally, play the game a little bit. I happen to work in a school with a challenging secretary, so I know that, even as the administrator, we know how to play her the right way, and our life is a lot better. So I always think secretary gets your calls in a lot faster and can make things happen. So, and remember that teachers are humans too, and they do make mistakes, which is frustrating because obviously that's your baby that you give to them every day to take care of, and you expect things to go perfectly. And sometimes that doesn't happen. I know we had one teacher who's a lovely, lovely girl, and I think it was mid-October, and a father came to me extremely upset. His son had a 504. He had mentioned something to the teacher about an accommodation not being granted, and her response was, what 504? Which now it's a month into school, which there's no excuse for that. I don't know how every school district works. Our teachers take attendance online. It comes up, and if the child has an IEP or a 504, there's a dot next to their name. So they can easily, click on that dot on the computer screen, and the IEP will open up. So there was no excuse for that. So immediately I brought her into my office, expecting to reprimand her because I was appalled that a month and a half in, she had no idea that the child had a 504. And she started hysterically crying, and had mentioned that she was going through some personal issues. Her sister was recently diagnosed with a brain tumor. She had passed about a month after the conversation that we had. And like I said, she was a wonderful teacher who just was not on her game that year. So sometimes there's more to the story than you would think. So ask questions and realize that people do make mistakes. Like I said, it's your baby, so you want everything to go perfectly, and you get like the mama bear when things don't. But know that, I would say, not that there aren't a few bad apples out there, but for the most part, people are trying to do the right thing. And also be proactive instead of reactive. I plan on starting the first day of school with a note to Jackson's teacher, starting with, as I'm sure you're aware, Jackson has an IEP, so if she's not aware, she will be aware from reading that line. She will go and look that up. And just basically say that I'd love to touch base in the first week or two of school just to see how he's adjusting and, get some information from you. So, I would be confident that she was aware he had an IEP to begin with, but if not, I'm going to be proactive and tip her off to that. And finally, a little education alphabet soup. Teachers can be very annoying, I know that, and educators. And we often speak in acronyms expecting that everybody knows what we're talking about, okay? We don't do it on purpose. That's just really how we converse all the time. I can say almost a complete sentence to someone at work with hardly any words in it, just with letters. So some of these were mentioned in the presentations, and some of them are new. Just curious if any of you remember any of these. Remember what an IFSP stands for? Individualized Family Service Plan. Service Plan, right. How about an IEP? What? Individualized Education Plan or program. How about the CSE? You'll have a meeting at the CSE. The Committee of Special Education. And CPSE is the Committee on Preschool Special Education. How about PT? Good. Physical therapy. ADD? Yeah, I said some of them weren't on here. How about, can anyone get ODD?
Oppositional defiance disorder.
You got it. Oppositional defiant disorder. And actually, funny story.
Because I'm living through it.
Yeah? So, I don't know how many of you, when your children are young and you kind of spell the words with your spouse so that they don't know what they're talking about. So I guess it was about a couple months ago, right? Jackson started a new soccer group, and Greg took him, and he came back, and I said, how were the families? What was the group like? What? And he said, most of them were nice, but there was this woman. She was just and Jackson was there, so he goes, she was just very ODD. So I go, ODD? What do you mean she was ODD? He goes, what do you mean, what do I mean? She was just acting ODD. I go, you asked her to do something and she was defiant to you? He's like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. He goes, she was odd. The woman was just odd. So I said, because ODD in education world is like a thing. That's, oppositional defiant disorder. I thought you asked her something and she wouldn't listen to you. So how about LRE? I didn't mention that, but it does come up very often in special education. Anyone know? It's the least restrictive environment. Okay, so it's you want the child educated with their non-disabled peers to the extent possible. Okay, you don't want to just ship them off to a special class because he or she has a vision issue. How about FAPE? We just mentioned that one. Not a test, don't worry. I thought I heard it was free, appropriate public education, right? And we talked about appropriate doesn't necessarily mean the best, kind of equals average, so you really have to push if you want to get a little more. OT? Good. Occupational therapy. EI? That was early on. We talked about, when your children are just born and maybe need some early intervention. And how about VI? Right. Visual impairment. Okay. Excellent. And that is it. I don't know if anyone has any questions for me. I know we've kind of asked some questions as we went along. I hope I answered, gave some information for you, gave you some background.
I would like to say something.
Sure.
My son has, it's an IEP, but it's also, I know it sounds crazy, but it's also a 504 because it's not an extreme case of IEP. Only reason why he has it is for in case he were to need more, he qualifies for it. But he doesn't need it right now. He has no special education classes or anything, but they provide him with the tools, the magnifier. He gets his own, it's called a physio. It's a computer on his desk. It's a screen. He has a little camera, and he points it anywhere in the room, and it zooms it to his desk. And so he can see everything good, and she checks in on him regularly throughout the year. But that's, I guess, maybe the part of the IEP option of it.
I've never heard of both together,
I
so
know.
that's
I say it's both because he's mainstream. Like, he has no special needs. The only thing that he has is her checking on him on a...
that could fall under an IEP.
Every 3 months she comes and she says, Hunter, you doing okay?
Right.
You doing good? Your grades are still...
Right.
And on his IEP, it just says, grades must remain above a C average.
Okay.
And he stays with Ace, so she comes, she checks on him, makes sure he doesn't need a different magnifier, and she says, hey, you need a bigger screen on your computer. Oh, no, okay. And then that's it.
That's great.
And we have a meeting, and everything's good. So, like, I guess there's different, like, because she's having the same problem, like, she's having a problem getting them to say it's okay. So she may need just a 504 because he doesn't have as much of a visual impairment.
Right. Okay. Have you've had your child evaluated, or you?
She's trying to. And
Okay.
they told her no.
What do you mean they told her no?
They just,
Yeah, like,
she doesn't know the correct place to go, I guess.
they're saying that,
'Cause they
you
can't do that.
give him an advantage
Because he's doing good.
because he's doing well.
That doesn't make any sense.
No,
to me.
not at all.
Because they
Not at all.
I did the 3 to 5 year old where I got him evaluated. They put him in a room, and I watched in a different room, and they did all kind of like activities. with him. They were like, he doesn't qualify. He can do everything he's supposed to do. And so I was like, okay. So he started kindergarten with no IEP, no nothing. In the kindergarten, the teacher's like, I think he might benefit from it. He may not need it, but he may benefit from it. So somebody came in and they started his IEP, and from that point on, like, he gets everything he needs, but he doesn't have to have it. If he says, I don't want that, then he doesn't use it. And like I think mostly the reason why he has it is to get the funds for that Vizio thing on his desk. And
Right.
he does qualify because of
That
his
works.
vision being
It's
poor.
better. Yeah.
Her son go to public school.
I was going to say, it's in public
Hers
school.
doesn't, mine
Do you have
doesn't.
information? Oh, her son does not go to public
Hers
school.
goes to private.
Okay.
And mine
They're
goes
not
to public,
required
and
to.
she knows that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of the issue.
Okay.
But that lady who she's talking to at her school is over both, like, she's with our house. Our schools are right next door to each other.
What state are you in?
Yeah.
What's?
She's in Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Oh, you're Louisiana.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
here.
I should have known from the
Oh,
accent.
yeah. But she's, like, our schools are right there, but hers is private. But the lady does both.
Okay.
Like I said, but she helps my son, but doesn't help hers because it's a private school, I guess.
They're not required.
They're not required. No. Although, did you try through getting documentation from your doctor and they denied you?
Yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's what I would do. That's what I would do.
I have a question
That's
about
frustrating.
that.
Sure.
As far as the accommodations, does the doctor have to specify what they are?
Usually,
Okay.
yeah. You can have your doctor, which I spoke to a doctor about it, but we didn't need it at that point in time. They gave us services without that. But my doctor said, write down what you want me to write down, and I'd be happy to list it.
Because
So,
my doctor did the same thing, but I didn't list, like, I didn't know what all he needed. So
Okay.
as I go through, I'm looking like, yeah, he still needs this and that.
yeah, no, and that could be added. And you can make additions to the IEP or the 504 at any time. You don't have to wait until the end of the year meeting. If you have an issue or you think, your child needs something more, request to have a meeting. Call up the district. They'll probably have you put it in writing, and they have to have a meeting within 30 days, and you can make adjustments. You don't have to wait till, May or June or whenever your school is over to change it for the following year.
It's just interesting to hear from different districts. Our district, my son's same age as yours, and they were for K4. They were more. I mean, they were. I think it was the funding aspect.
Yeah, because they don't have to pay for it, so they'll give you everything before age 5. Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted him.
They had never done an IEP for a 4-year-old.
Okay.
They said, this is our first time we've ever done anything
Oh, really?
like this. And I said, well, okay.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
First for both.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I mean, the vision teacher, his big thing is he's got severe light sensitivity for going from light to dark and dark to light. So his big thing is recess
Okay.
and getting in and out of the building. He doesn't see the
Built that into
stairs.
the
Yeah,
IEP
and that was the big concern is a teacher literally has to help him in and out of the building. and
Or an
Which-
eight
or an
Okay.
eight or somebody, so.
Which is times like that for me as a parent. I don't know how you feel, but it's like I'm not so worried about him in the classroom as much as I am outside of the classroom. I have anxiety over phys ed, hoping he's going to see the ball coming at his face and that kids aren't going to tease him about that. Getting down the stairs, the same thing, because he still has trouble with that if it's not, if you can't clearly see that. We have Greg's aunt's house. We laugh about it because you have to laugh or else you'd cry half the time. But she has this wood floor, and then it drops down one step and continues with the wood floor. And it doesn't matter how many times we go there. It's like a slow motion cartoon. Like, there goes Jackson, and we're like, watch the step. And boom, he's down. Every time.
Giant, 2 levels, and it's all cedar, so it matches.
Yeah, you can't see every single time. So I know it's those times, not necessarily in the classroom when they're with the teacher, but it's all the other times that gives us anxiety that we're always working for. So yeah. So yeah. I also have my email on there. If anyone has any questions or I can help in any way or find out the answers for you, I'd be more than happy to. So thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate it. Thank you.